Ladies and gentlemen, let me talk to you for a moment because this right here is something so many people go through but don't know how to explain. If he is always in your mind without any communication, that means something deeper is going on inside you. Now listen carefully because this ain't about him calling or texting. This is about why he still has space in your thoughts when he no longer has access to your life. Ladies and gentlemen, let me slow this thing down and talk straight to your heart for a minute. When I say emotional attachment doesn't disappear just because communication stops, I need you to really hear what that means. Too many people think silence is the end of feeling. Like once the phone stops ringing, the messages stop coming, the emotions are supposed to shut off too. That's not how the human heart works. The heart doesn't follow rules, timelines, or logic. The heart remembers what mattered, what felt real, and what once gave it hope. See, when someone has been a part of your emotional world, they don't just vanish because they stop talking. Communication is an action, but attachment is a bond. And bonds don't break the same way conversations do. You can stop speaking to someone today and still feel them tomorrow, next week, even months later. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you human. It means you allowed yourself to feel something deeply. And deep feelings don't come with an off switch. A lot of people beat themselves up over this. They say, why am I still thinking about him when we don't even talk? Let me tell you why. Because emotions are stored in memory. Your mind holds on to moments, not messages. It remembers the laughter, the comfort, the way you felt when you thought things were going somewhere. And when communication ends suddenly or without clarity, the emotional attachment doesn't get a chance to resolve itself. It just hangs there, unfinished, unresolved, waiting for an answer that may never come. That's why silence can hurt more than arguments. At least in an argument, there's engagement. Silence leaves room for imagination, and imagination can be dangerous when emotions are involved. Your mind starts filling in the blanks. You replay scenarios. You question yourself. You wonder what changed, what you missed, what you could have done differently. And every time you do that, the emotional attachment gets fed again. Let me say this clearly. Just because he stopped communicating doesn't mean what you felt was imaginary. It doesn't mean it wasn't real. It just means the connection didn't end properly. And when something doesn't end properly, your heart keeps revisiting it, trying to make sense of it. That's not love chasing someone who left. That's your heart trying to close a chapter that was ripped out instead of gently finished. Ladies, emotional attachment often forms when you invest time, vulnerability, and hope. You don't just give your attention, you give your imagination. You picture what could be. You emotionally move into a future before it ever arrives. And when communication stops, your body might accept the absence, but your heart is still living in the future it created. That's why it feels so heavy. You're not just missing a person, you're grieving a possibility. And listen to me carefully here. Emotional attachment can exist even when the relationship wasn't healthy. Sometimes it's even stronger then. When love is inconsistent, your emotions get hooked on the highs and lows. Your mind keeps waiting for the good moments to come back. So when communication stops, your heart doesn't say, this is over. It says, maybe this is just a pause. And that hope keeps the attachment alive. This is why people struggle to move on even when they know they should. Logic tells you one thing, but emotion tells you another. Logic says if he wanted to talk, he would. Emotion says, but what if he's thinking about me too? And until emotional attachment is processed, logic rarely wins that fight. Now here's something important. Emotional attachment doesn't mean destiny. It doesn't mean that person is meant for you. It simply means you opened yourself emotionally, and that openness deserves care, not judgment. You don't heal attachment by pretending it doesn't exist. You heal it by understanding it. You acknowledge that something mattered to you, even if it didn't last. People think moving on means forgetting. That's not true. Moving on means loosening the emotional grip. It means accepting that what once was important no longer has authority over your peace. But that takes time. And during that time, the absence of communication can actually make attachment louder before it makes it quieter. Silence gives your emotions room to echo. Let me help you reframe this. If he's always in your mind without communication, it doesn't mean you should reach out. It doesn't mean you're supposed to chase closure from someone who chose silence. It means you need to give yourself the closure they didn't provide. You do that by telling yourself the truth. The truth is, someone who wants to be in your life will not disappear without explanation. The truth is, your value does not decrease because someone walked away. Emotional attachment fades when you stop feeding it with fantasy and start grounding it in reality. Reality says, this connection existed, but it no longer serves me. Reality says, I can honor what I felt without holding on to what hurt me. And once you start doing that, the thoughts don't control you anymore. They pass through instead of settling in. So don't rush your healing. Don't shame yourself for thinking about someone who once mattered. Emotional attachment doesn't disappear overnight just because communication stops. It disappears when understanding replaces confusion and self-respect replaces longing. And that process, ladies and gentlemen, is not weakness. That's growth. Ladies and gentlemen, let me take you a little deeper now, because when we talk about the mind replaying what the heart hasn't resolved, we're talking about one of the most powerful forces in human emotion. Your mind is not your enemy, but when something ends without clarity, your mind goes to work trying to finish the story. It keeps circling back, not because you want to suffer, but because unresolved emotions demand attention. The mind doesn't like open loops. It wants meaning. It wants understanding. And when the heart doesn't get closure, the mind keeps pressing replay. You ever notice how you don't obsess over things that ended clearly? When someone told you the truth, when you knew exactly where you stood, even if it hurt, you eventually accepted it. Pain fades when there's clarity, but confusion lingers. Confusion stays in your thoughts at night. Confusion shows up in quiet moments. That's why when there's no communication, your mind fills the silence with memories, question and what ifs. The heart feels first, but the mind tries to explain the feeling later. When a connection ends suddenly or slowly fades without explanation, the heart feels the loss. But the mind doesn't understand it, so it starts searching backward. It replays text messages. It replays conversations. It replays moments where you laughed, where you felt close, where you felt chosen. And every replay feels like you're getting closer to an answer. But really, you're just deepening the attachment. Ladies, understand this. When your mind keeps replaying someone, it's not always because you miss them as they are now. You miss the version of them that existed in your heart, the version that made promises, even unspoken ones, the version that made you feel safe, excited, hopeful. Your mind is loyal to the memory, not the reality. And that's dangerous if you don't recognize it. Unresolved emotions are like unfinished sentences. They echo. You keep trying to finish the thought, but you don't have all the words. So your mind keeps searching. Was it something I said? Did I ask for too much? Was it real for him or just real for me? Those questions don't come from weakness. They come from emotional investment. You don't ask questions about people you never cared about. Let me say something that might sting a little, but it's necessary. Sometimes the mind keeps replaying because the heart is avoiding acceptance. Acceptance hurts because it means admitting that what you wanted didn't happen. Acceptance means letting go of the future you imagined, and the mind would rather replay the past than face the disappointment of the truth. So it distracts you with memories instead of allowing you to grieve. And grieving doesn't just happen when someone passes away. You grieve relationships, you grieve potential, you grieve the version of yourself you were when you believed things would turn out differently. When the heart hasn't grieved, the mind keeps revisiting the loss, hoping for a different ending. That's why time alone doesn't heal everything. Awareness does. Silence after connection can feel louder than noise. When there's no communication, your mind fills the quiet with emotion. You think about him while driving, while working, before you sleep. Not because you're choosing to, but because your mind associates him with feelings that haven't been resolved. The mind is trying to protect you from pain by understanding it, but without information, it just creates stories. Here's where people get stuck. They mistake mental replay for a sign. They think if he's on my mind this much, it must mean something. And yes, it means something, but not what you think. It means there is an emotional loose end inside you, not that he's thinking about you too. Your mind thinking about him is about your healing, not his intentions. Once you understand that, you can start taking your power back. Instead of asking, why is he still in my mind? You ask, what inside me hasn't healed yet? Is it rejection? Is it abandonment? Is it the fear of not being chosen? When you answer that honestly, the replay begins to slow down. The mind stops obsessing when the heart feels heard. That means you allow yourself to feel the sadness without rushing to replace it. You stop judging yourself for caring. You stop pretending you're over it when you're not. You acknowledge the loss for what it is, not what you wish it was. And slowly, the mind stops replaying because the heart no longer needs an explanation. Let me remind you of something powerful. Closure is not something someone gives you. Closure is something you decide. It's the moment you say, I may never understand why, but I choose to move forward anyway. That decision quiets the mind more than any message ever could. So when your mind keeps replaying him without communication, don't fight it. Listen to what it's trying to tell you. It's pointing you toward an unresolved emotion that needs attention, compassion, and truth. And once you give your heart what it needs, the mind will finally let the story rest. Ladies and gentlemen, let me talk to you about something most people underestimate, and that is how absence can amplify feelings more than presence ever did. When someone is in your life consistently, your emotions adjust to their availability. You get used to their voice, their messages, their attention. But when that presence suddenly disappears, the absence creates a vacuum and emotions rush in to fill that empty space. That's why someone can feel more powerful in your mind when they are gone than when they were actually there. See, presence gives you information. Absence gives you imagination, and imagination has no limits. When communication stops, you're no longer reacting to who the person really is. You're reacting to who they were at their best or who you hope they could be. Absence removes flaws and highlights memories. It takes ordinary moments and turns them into emotional highlights. And the mind, when left alone with memories, tends to edit out the parts that hurt and replay the parts that felt good. This is why silence can make feelings feel stronger. You're no longer distracted by reality. You're seeing their inconsistencies, their delays, their lack of effort. All you have is the idea of them. And ideas can be intoxicating. The heart starts craving something it can't reach, and the mind confuses that craving with love. But what you're really experiencing is emotional withdrawal. When someone leaves your life, especially without communication, your nervous system notices the change. Your body had adjusted to emotional connection, to anticipation, to routine, and when that routine disappears, your system goes into alert mode. That's why you feel restless. That's why your thoughts drift back to him. Your body is looking for what feels familiar, not necessarily what is healthy. Absence also gives your feelings room to grow because there's no closure to contain them. When someone is present, their actions either reinforce or weaken your emotions. But when they're gone, there's nothing to counterbalance your thoughts. No new information comes in to correct your assumptions. So the feelings expand unchecked. They grow louder in the quiet. Ladies, understand this. Missing someone doesn't always mean you want them back. Sometimes it means you miss how you felt when you believed in the connection. Absence reminds you of a time when you felt hopeful, wanted, or emotionally alive. And in moments of loneliness, your mind reaches for that feeling, not realizing that the source of that feeling is no longer available in the same way. Let me say something important. Absence can create false value. When someone is gone, the mind starts to exaggerate their importance. You forget how much effort you made. You forget how many times you waited. You forget the confusion. All you remember is the connection. And that selective memory can trick you into believing that what you lost was rare, when in reality, what you lost was inconsistent. That's why people often feel tempted to break silence. They think communication will relieve the pain. But what they're really hoping for is relief from the feelings that absence created. And here's the hard truth. Contact doesn't always bring relief. Sometimes it brings disappointment because reality doesn't match the version of them your absence-built imagination created. Absence teaches you something if you let it. It reveals how attached you became. It shows you where you placed emotional dependence. It exposes what you were using that person to fill inside yourself. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to learn from. Because once you see it, you can begin to meet those needs in healthier ways. Silence gives you space to hear your own thoughts, even though they may feel overwhelming at first. But within that overwhelm is information. You learn what triggers your longing. You learn what moments make you reach for your phone. And when you observe that instead of reacting to it, the feelings start to lose their power. Let me remind you of this. Absence magnifies emotion, but time and understanding shrink it. The first days feel heavy. The first weeks feel endless. But as you fill your life with new routines, new focus, and self-respect, the absence becomes quieter. The space they left starts to fill with you. So if he's always on your mind without communication, it's not because he became more important in silence. It's because absence gave your feelings room to echo. And once you stop feeding those echoes with fantasy and start grounding yourself in truth, the volume comes down. What felt overwhelming begins to fade, and what remains is clarity, strength, and growth. Ladies and gentlemen, let me talk to you about what it really means when something stays on your mind, because what stays on your mind is often pointing to an unmet truth or a lesson your soul hasn't fully learned yet. When a person remains in your thoughts without any communication, it's not always about missing them as a person. Many times it's about something inside you that hasn't been answered, acknowledged, or healed. The mind is intelligent. It doesn't hold on to things randomly. It holds on to what it believes still has meaning. See, life has a way of teaching us lessons through people. Some people come into your life to stay, and some people come into your life to show you something about yourself. When a connection ends, but the thoughts remain, it usually means the lesson hasn't been fully understood yet. Your mind keeps revisiting the experience, trying to extract wisdom from it. Until the T happens, the memory stays active. A lot of people think thinking about someone means they're meant to return. That's not always true. Sometimes they're meant to remind you of what you tolerated, remind you of how deeply you can feel, remind you of where you ignored red flags, remind you of how much you gave without being matched. When the lesson isn't clear, the mind keeps bringing the person back as a symbol, not a destination. Let me tell you something important. What stays on your mind is often connected to what challenged your self-worth. When someone leaves without explanation, without consistency, without choosing you clearly, it creates a wound. And wounds demand attention. Your mind keeps asking why, not because you want them back, but because you want to understand what that experience says about you. And until you separate their behavior from your value, the thoughts linger. Sometimes the lesson is about boundaries. You think about him because you crossed your own boundaries for him. You compromised yourself. You stayed quiet when you should have spoken. You accepted less than you deserved. And now that the relationship is gone, your mind replays it, not to hurt you, but to teach you, to make sure you don't repeat the same pattern with someone new. Other times, the lesson is about attachment. You may realize you are more attached to the idea of being chosen than to the person himself. And once that idea is threatened, your mind panics. It keeps revisiting the situation, trying to reclaim that sense of worth. But here's the truth. Your worth was never tied to his decision. The lesson is learning to validate yourself without waiting for someone else to do it. What stays on your mind also reveals what you haven't forgiven yet. Maybe you haven't forgiven him for leaving. Maybe you haven't forgiven yourself for ignoring signs. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing behavior. It means releasing yourself from carrying the emotional weight of it. Until forgiveness happens, the mind keeps the memory alive, hoping one day it will feel lighter. And let me say this clearly. Growth is uncomfortable. When you're outgrowing an old version of yourself, your mind revisits the experiences that shaped that version. It's part of evolution. The thoughts are like checkpoints, reminding you how far you've come and why you can't go back. That's why sometimes you think about someone and instead of warmth, you feel clarity. That's the lesson settling in. The moment you understand why someone stayed on your mind is the moment they begin to leave it. Awareness weakens emotional attachment. Once you see the truth of the situation, the fantasy breaks. You stop asking what could have been and start appreciating what you learned. And when learning replaces longing, peace follows. So if he's always in your mind without communication, don't rush to erase him. Decode him. Ask yourself what that experience taught you about love, about limits, about self-respect. When you learn the lesson fully, the mind no longer needs the reminder. The thought fades naturally without force because the mind doesn't cling to people forever. It clings to meaning. And once meaning is understood, the chapter closes on its own.